Rancher found 3 girls tied to his fence with "Take Us" written in charcoal. At dawn, the rancher reins in his horse at a split-rail fence, where 3 shivering girls are bound with rope, their feet bare, their faces pale. Above them, scratched in black on the wood, the haunting words, "Take us." He cuts them free, but their whisper chills him more than the morning wind. He said he'd come back for us, if nobody wanted us. In a land where the law turns its back and men trade children like poker chips, one rancher must decide, protect them as his own, or watch them be claimed by the father who abandoned them. But the girls carry more than sorrow. Their late mother left behind a deed to land with water rights, a prize worth killing for. Now guns are being hired, the sheriff looks away, and the past rides back armed and vengeful. When blood, faith, and justice collide on the frontier, will one man's mercy be enough to save 3 unwanted daughters? Before we begin, I invite you to take a breath. This space is for the quiet believers, the ones who know small kindnesses can ripple into something greater. The morning frost crunched under Eli Carter's boots as he approached the 3 shivering girls. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he worked to untie the crude knots binding them to his fence posts. The rough hemp rope had left angry marks on their wrists, and his jaw tightened at the sight. "Easy now," he murmured, keeping his voice soft and steady like he would with spooked horses. The oldest girl's dress hung in tatters, but she lifted her chin with whatever dignity she could muster. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, telling of nights without proper rest. The middle child pressed herself against the fence post, even after Eli freed her, her small fingers gripping the splintered wood. Her tangled hair fell forward, hiding her face from view. But it was the littlest one who broke his heart clean through. Couldn't be more than 5 or 6 years old. Her bare feet blew with cold. "Sir," the oldest girl's voice cracked. "We didn't mean to trespass. He said someone here might take us in." She swayed on her feet, and Eli caught her elbow gently before she could fall. "Who brought you here?" Eli asked, shrugging off his heavy wool coat. He draped it around the youngest girl's shoulders, and she clutched at the warm fabric like it was pure gold. The coat swallowed her whole, dragging on the frost-covered ground. "A man," the oldest girl whispered. "Didn't give his name. Said he couldn't keep us no more." She glanced at her sisters, then back at Eli with eyes too old for her years. "Said if nobody wanted us here, he'd come back." The threat hung in the crisp morning air. Eli scanned the empty landscape, taking in the rolling hills and scattered pine trees. No dust from departing wagons, no hoof prints except those of his own horse. Whoever had done this had long since vanished into the dawn. The middle girl finally raised her head, revealing a face streaked with dirt and tears. "Are you going to send us away?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Eli's chest tightened. He'd lived alone since Sarah passed 3 years ago. The ranch house too quiet, too empty. He wasn't prepared for this. 3 young lives suddenly depending on him. But looking at their hopeful, frightened faces, he knew he couldn't turn them away. "No," he said firmly. "Nobody's sending you anywhere." The relief that flooded their faces made his throat catch. "Let's get you inside where it's warm." His horse nickered softly as Eli gathered the youngest into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, light as a bird's bones beneath the heavy coat. The older girls followed close behind as he led the way toward the ranch house, their bare feet leaving small prints in the frost. The morning sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, but Eli barely noticed the dawn's beauty. His mind was already racing ahead. They'd need clothes, shoes, proper meals. The oldest looked like she hadn't eaten a full meal in days. "I've got some soup left from yesterday," he said over his shoulder. "We'll warm that up first thing. Then we'll see about finding you all something clean to wear." The ranch house came into view, its weathered boards glowing in the early light. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a pot-bellied stove. Some plain furniture Sarah had helped him choose when they'd first married. But it was solid, warm, and safe. The little one in his arms had started shivering less, her head heavy against his shoulder. Her sisters trudged behind, leaving the crude message on the fence far behind them. The charcoal letters would wash away with the next rain, but Eli knew he'd never forget the sight of those words scrawled above 3 abandoned children. "Take us." As he reached for the door handle, the oldest girl spoke again. "Mister, thank you for cutting us loose." Her voice wavered between gratitude and fear, like she wasn't sure which emotion to trust. Eli paused, his hand on the door. No need for thanks. No decent person would leave children tied up like that. He pushed the door open, warmth from the banked fire washing over them. "My name's Eli Carter. This here's my ranch, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need." He ushered them inside, watching as they huddled near the stove's residual warmth. 3 lost girls, abandoned on his fence like unwanted cattle. His heart ached with anger at whoever had left them there, mixed with a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt since Sarah was alive. The youngest yawned against his shoulder, her small fingers still clutching his coat. The middle child had finally stopped trembling, and the oldest stood straight despite her exhaustion, watching him with cautious hope. Inside the ranch house, Eli moved with careful purpose, not wanting to startle the girls who watched his every movement. He added split logs to the pot-bellied stove, working the damper until the flames caught proper. The iron kettle soon steamed with fresh water for washing. "Here now," he said, setting out tin cups of milk and yesterday's biscuits on the worn kitchen table. "Best eat something while the water heats." The 3 girls huddled together on the wooden bench, their shoulders touching. The oldest kept one arm wrapped around the little one, while the middle child pressed close to her other side. They stared at the food like they couldn't quite believe it was meant for them. "Go on," Eli encouraged softly. "There's plenty more." Where that came from. They fell upon the food with desperate hunger, though the oldest tried to maintain some dignity as she broke the biscuits into smaller pieces for her sisters. Eli busied himself with the wash basin, giving them space to eat without feeling watched. "I'm Maria," the oldest finally said, her voice quiet but clear. "These are my sisters, Sarah and Hope." She nodded to each in turn, the middle child and then the littlest one. Hope clutched her tin cup with both hands, milk leaving a white mustache above her trembling lips. "Pleased to meet you properly," Eli replied, keeping his tone gentle. He had 100 questions burning in his mind, but the way Maria shifted to shield her sisters whenever he came to, close told him now wasn't the time for pressing them. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the cabin's weathered walls. Eli had just finished heating a second kettle of wash water when hoofbeats approached outside. The girls tensed, Hope pressing her face into Maria's side. "That'll be Reverend Amos," Eli said, recognizing the familiar clip-clop of the preachers. "Old Mar. He usually stops to water his horse on his circuit rounds." The door creaked open, and Reverend Amos Fletcher stepped inside, removing his broad-brimmed hat. "Morning, Eli. I thought I might—" He broke off, his weathered face going pale as he caught sight of the girls. Maria stared back at him, her dark eyes wide with recognition. The Reverend took an unsteady step forward, his hat crushed between his hands. "Good Lord above," he whispered. "You're Elena's daughters." The name fell like a stone in the quiet cabin. Maria's shoulders straightened, though her voice wavered. "You knew our mother?" "Yes, child. She stayed at my mission years ago." The Reverend's voice grew thick with emotion. "You have her eyes. And when you spoke just now, it's her voice exactly." Eli watched as Maria's careful composure cracked. "Slightly. She used to speak of a kind preacher before she died." Sarah and Hope pressed closer to their sister, seeking comfort in her familiar presence. Reverend Amos sank into a chair, his legs seeming to give out. "Elena was a remarkable woman. She came to us seeking shelter, teaching our children Navajo songs in return for safe harbor. When she left, she was carrying you, Maria." The revelation settled over the cabin. These weren't nameless orphans left on Eli's fence. They had a history, a mother who had once sought sanctuary just as they had now. The knowledge brought some comfort, but it also raised harder questions that Eli wasn't sure he wanted answered yet. "Your father," the Reverend began carefully, but Maria's face closed like a door slamming shut. "We don't speak of him," she said firmly, pulling Hope closer as the little girl whimpered. Eli recognized the fear beneath her steel tone. "No need to speak of anything you're not ready for," he said. "Right now, you all need rest more than talk." The Reverend nodded, understanding in his eyes. He stayed through the afternoon, helping Eli gather clean blankets and spare clothes. As dusk painted the windows purple, Eli made up his bed with fresh linens. "You girls take the bedroom," he said, gathering his own pillow. "I'll bed down fine by the fire." "But it's your bed," Maria protested weakly, though exhaustion had begun to blur her words. "And tonight it's yours," Eli said firmly. "Go on now, get some sleep." He watched as the three girls disappeared into the bedroom, the door closing softly behind them. The house felt different with them in it, less empty, though worry gnawed at his gut. He settled onto his bedroll near the banked fire, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other breathing in his home. "You'll need help, Reverend," Amos said quietly from his chair. "3 young ones all at once. I reckon I will," Eli agreed. "But first they need to feel safe. Everything else can wait." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Eli hitched the wagon while the girls ate breakfast, knowing they needed proper clothes and supplies. Maria helped Sarah and Hope into the wagon bed, which Eli had cushioned with fresh straw and blankets. "Town might be a mite uncomfortable," he warned them gently. "Folk can be peculiar about newcomers." Maria's chin lifted slightly. "We're used to stairs," she said, though her hand tightened on Hope's shoulder. The 12-mile drive to town was quiet, except for the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional comment from Hope about passing rabbits or birds. As they approached Main Street, Eli noticed heads turning, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Women on the boardwalk paused their shopping to whisper behind gloved hands. "Look at those eyes, definitely half-breeds." Someone muttered loud enough to carry. Eli's jaw tightened, but he kept his gaze forward, guiding the wagon to the hitching post outside Mason's General Store. He helped the girls down, noticing how Maria positioned herself between her sisters and the staring townsfolk. The store's bell jangled as they entered. Tom Mason looked up from his ledger, his usual welcome dying on his lips as he took in the 3 girls trailing behind Eli. "Morning, Tom," Eli said evenly. "Need some supplies, Eli?" Mason's eyes darted between the children and the window, where several townspeople had gathered to peer in. "I heard talk about newcomers. These girls need proper clothes," Eli continued, laying his list on the counter. "And food supplies for the month." Mason shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Eli, you know, I run a respectable establishment. Can't have people thinking I'm encouraging certain elements." The store grew deadly quiet. Sarah pressed against Maria's side while Hope clutched her sister's skirt. Eli reached into his pocket and slammed a stack of silver dollars onto the wooden counter. The sharp crack made Mason jump. "These coins spend same as any other," Eli said, his quiet voice carrying authority that filled the room. "And these children need clothes and food. Now will you sell to us, or should I ride over to Preston's store in Millbrook?" Mason's face reddened, but the mention of losing business to his rival seemed to decide him. Right then. "What sizes for?" "The dresses?" As Mason gathered their supplies, the bell jangled again. Sheriff Dobbs filled the doorway, his badge catching the morning light. He surveyed the scene with calculating eyes. "Eli, heard you'd taken in some strays." "These girls were left on my land," Eli replied, "tied to my fence like animals. Dobbs hooked his thumbs in his belt. "Walk with me a minute." Outside, the sheriff led Eli a few steps from the store. "Situation's not as simple as you might think," he drawled. "Law's clear on this. If they're his blood, a father's got rights to his young ones." "Rights?" Eli's voice was dangerously quiet. "What about their rights to safety?" "Know something." "About their daddy," Dobbs continued, ignoring Eli's question. "Drifter name of Dawson. Shows up every few months, drinks heavy, plays cards heavier, owes money all over the territory." He shrugged. "Not my concern unless he breaks the law." "Abandoning children isn't breaking the law?" "Can't prove he meant it permanent-like. Man falls on hard times, might need to temporarily place his kids." Dobbs's expression suggested he knew exactly how hollow his words sounded. "Just giving you fair warning. He's got claim on them if he comes back." The ride home was silent, the new supplies rattling in the wagon bed. Eli's thoughts churned with the sheriff's words and his own growing protective instinct toward these. 3 vulnerable lives in his care. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, Maria helped Eli wash the supper dishes. Sarah and Hope were already asleep in their borrowed nightgowns, exhausted from the day's tensions. "Our father," Maria said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He lost everything in a card game. His horse, his guns, even his coat." Her hands trembled on the dish she was drying. "Said we were weighing him down. That he'd come fetch us back if he ever struck it rich." Eli set down the pot he was scrubbing, turning to face her. Maria's eyes shone with unshed tears in the lamplight. "He tied us there himself. Saw maybe someone kind would take us, or maybe not. He didn't." Her voice broke. "He didn't care which." Eli's jaw clenched at the cruel casualness of it. He laid a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder. "Listen to me. You're safe here. All 3 of you. Nobody's going to take you away." Maria nodded, wiping her eyes with her apron. Eli helped her finish the dishes, then watched as she slipped into the bedroom to join her sisters. He sat by the dying fire, head bowed in silent prayer, asking for wisdom to protect these children the law seemed determined to ignore. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, Eli rose from his vigil, his resolve hardened. To steal, sheriff or no sheriff, law or no law, these girls would have a home under his roof. He'd make sure of that. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Carter ranch yard as Eli gathered the girls for their first day of chores. He believed honest work would help them feel at home, give them purpose beyond their fears. "Sarah, come see here." He led the middle sister to the chicken coop, where speckled hens pecked at the dirt. "Scattering feed's an important job. Too much in one spot, they'll waste it. Too little, they'll squabble." Sarah's eyes lit up as Eli demonstrated, her small hands soon mimicking his measured movements. The chickens clustered around her feet, making her giggle, a sound that brightened the whole yard. In the kitchen, Maria stood at the wooden table, her face set in concentration as she worked the bread dough. Her fingers remembered the motions her mother had taught her, pressing and folding with quiet determination. Flour dusted her apron as she shaped the loaves, just as Elena had done years ago. Little Hope stayed close to the cabin, never straying far from where she could see Eli. She gathered kindling in her arms, making tiny piles near the wood box. "Is this helping?" she would ask softly, and Eli's gentle "sure is" brought a shy smile to her face. As the days passed, the sound of children's laughter began to ring across the yard. Sarah chased chickens back to their coop, while Maria called out timing for the bread in the oven. Even Hope grew bolder, venturing into the garden to pull weeds alongside Eli. One clear afternoon, Reverend Amos rode up in his buggy, his Bible tucked under his arm. The girls gathered around as he read from Psalms, their faces intent on his words. The Reverend's voice carried across the porch with warmth and strength, speaking of refuge and shelter under mighty wings. Later that week, An aging Navajo scout named Jonah Yazzie appeared at the fence line. His weathered face creased in a smile as he dismounted, nodding respectfully to Eli before turning to the children. "Yada," he greeted them in Navajo, and Maria's head snapped up at the familiar sound. He spoke gentle words in their mother's language, telling them of how he had known Elena's people, of their strength and dignity. Maria translated for her sisters, her voice thick with emotion. "He says Mother's family still tells stories of her beauty, of her kind heart." Hope pressed close to her sister, while Sarah's eyes shone with pride. But not all changes were welcome. In town, Eli noticed the shifting attitudes, the hardening faces. Outside the feed store, he overheard Buck Wilson muttering to other ranchers, "Carter's gone soft in the head, feeding those savages on his good grain," Wilson spat. "Ain't natural, having their kind in a white man's house." The general store's orders came late, with items missing. Tom Mason claimed supply problems, but his eyes slid away from Eli's steady gaze. At the blacksmith's, the price for fixing a broken plow suddenly doubled. "Materials cost more these days," the smith said flatly, though Eli had never known the price to change in 10 years. Yet each evening, as Eli's cabin filled with warmth and movement, these troubles seemed to fade. Maria stirred the stew while Sarah set out tin plates. Hope arranged spoons with careful precision, counting them twice to be sure. They knelt together for evening prayers, 3 dark heads bowed beside his gray one. Eli's voice carried their gratitude and concerns heavenward, while small hands clasped trustingly in his rough ones. After the dishes were dried one night, Maria and Sarah began to hum softly. The melody wove through the cabin, an old hymn in Navajo that Elena had sung to them. Hope curled in Maria's lap, her eyes heavy with sleep, while Sarah's clear voice carried the harmony. Eli sat in his chair by the fire, listening. The tune spoke of faith and shelter, of God's endless love. Though he couldn't understand the words, their meaning reached deep into his heart, making it ache with tenderness, even as it swelled with joy. Maria's voice quavered on the final notes, her eyes bright with tears that didn't fall. Sarah leaned against her sister's shoulder, while Hope's breathing had deepened into sleep. "That was your mama's song?" Eli asked softly. Maria nodded. "She sang it every night, even when Father—" She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "Even when things were hard." Eli understood then. They weren't just sharing a song, but trusting him with a piece of their mother's memory, a fragment of the love they'd known before loss had found them. In that moment, as the fire crackled and the hymn's echo lingered in the warm air, his house felt truly full for the first time since his wife's passing. Sunday morning dawned clear and cool as Ayla hitched the wagon for church. Maria had helped her sisters into their freshly washed dresses, their dark hair neatly braided. The wooden church stood against the blue Colorado sky, its white painted boards gleaming in the morning light. As they climbed down from the wagon, Eli noticed the sudden stillness. Conversations died mid-word. Women drew their children closer. Men's faces hardened beneath their Sunday hats. The girls huddled closer to Eli as they walked up the church steps. Inside, they slipped into a back pew. The familiar sense of pine wood and lamp oil filled the air, but the usual welcoming murmur was absent. Reverend Amos stood at his pulpit, his keen eyes taking in the tension in his congregation. His voice rang clear as he opened his Bible. Today, we read from Matthew, chapter 19. The Reverend's steady gaze swept across the church. "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." His sermon spoke of Christ's boundless love, of how Jesus welcomed all children, regardless of their place of birth or parentage. Some faces in the congregation softened, while others remained set like stone. When the time came for hymns, the organ wheezed to life. Amazing grace filled the small church, but the singing felt strained, uncertain. Then Maria's voice rose. clear and sweet, the familiar words flowing in Navajo. Sarah joined her sister, their voices twining together in the ancient harmony their mother had taught them. Hope's small voice completed the trio, high and pure. The congregation fell silent, caught by the unexpected beauty. The organ notes trembled alone for a moment. Then, slowly, other voices joined in, first Reverend Amos, then the baker's wife, then others. English and Navajo blended together, lifting toward the rafters. Eli watched in amazement as hard faces softened. Buck Wilson, who had spoken against them just days ago, wiped his eyes with a calloused hand. For a precious moment, the barriers of prejudice cracked, letting something holy shine through. But after the final amen, reality crept back. As the congregation filed out, Eli caught fragments of whispered conversations. Might sound pretty, but they ain't natural here. Carter better watch himself, harboring those half-breeds. Somebody ought to do something about it. The threats chilled him, but Eli kept his face calm as he helped the girls into the wagon. He wouldn't let them see his worry. They had shown such courage today. He would match it with his own. That afternoon, while Sarah and Hope napped, a knock at the door brought Reverend Amos. He carried a wooden trunk, its sides scratched from long travel. "Elena left this in my keeping," he explained quietly. "It belongs to her daughters now." Maria's hands trembled as she opened the trunk. Inside lay carefully folded clothes, a few books, and a soft shawl that still held traces of her mother's scent. She pressed it to her face, breathing in memories out as she unfolded the shawl. A packet of papers fluttered to the floor. Maria picked them up, her eyes widening as she read the careful handwriting she remembered so well. "It's from Mother," she whispered. "A deed from the San Juan land office." Her voice grew stronger as she continued reading. "She bought land near the river. It says," Maria's eyes filled with tears, "it says it belongs to us, to me, and Sarah and Hope." Eli took the document gently, reading through the legal language. The property included valuable water rights, essential in this dry country. Elena had secured her daughter's future with this deed, giving them both resources and legitimacy that no one could deny. "Your mama was a wise woman," Reverend Amos said softly. "She knew what you'd need to make your way in this territory." Maria clutched the shawl, her face a mixture of grief and pride. "She always said we had to be strong, had to hold on to what was ours." She looked up at Eli, sudden fear crossing her face. "You won't send us away now, will you? Just because we have land?" Eli knelt beside her chair. "This is your home as long as you want it," he said firmly. "That paper's a shield for your future, not a reason to leave. Your mama made sure you'd have choices, and I aim to do the same." Maria nodded, relief softening her features. She carefully folded the deed and placed it back in the trunk, wrapping it in her mother's shawl. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, warming the cabin's wooden walls as Sarah and Hope's sleepy voices drifted from the bedroom. Their home felt more secure now, protected by both Elena's foresight and Eli's steadfast heart by lamplight. That evening, Eli spread the deed across his kitchen table, studying every detail. The careful script marked out boundaries along the San Juan River, describing a parcel with good water access. His finger traced the official territorial seal pressed into the corner. Such land would mean security, independence, a future where the girls could hold their heads high. Jonah Yazzie sat across from him, his weathered face thoughtful in the yellow light. "Many such deeds were given," he said quietly. "Not all were honored. But with Reverend Amos to witness Elena's signature, this one has strength." Maria hovered nearby, her sisters already asleep in the back room. Her dark eyes watched intently as Eli rolled the deed carefully. "I promise you," Eli said, meeting her gaze, "we'll make this right. Your mama knew what she was doing, securing this land for you three." Maria nodded, her shoulders straightening. "Mother always said the river was life itself. Dawn found Eli and Maria riding toward town, the deed secure in his saddlebag. He had left Sarah and Hope with Reverend Amos's wife, not wanting them to face the land office. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage. The county clerk's office smelled of dust and old paper. Behind the desk, Milton Webb barely looked up as they entered, but his lip curled when he saw Maria. "What business?" he drawled. Eli placed the deed before him. "Need to verify this land grant. It's properly recorded at San Juan." Webb's fingers seemed reluctant to touch the paper. He examined it with exaggerated slowness, holding it up to the light. Finally he grunted. "Seal's genuine enough." His eyes flicked to Maria. "Though some might question if such property should be in certain hands, the law is clear," Eli said evenly. "These girls are rightful heirs." Webb shrugged, pushing the deed back across the counter. "Maybe so, but plenty of folks'll want this water access. Don't expect peace, Carter." Maria's chin lifted at the clerk's tone. Ailey placed a protective hand on her shoulder as they left the office. The ride home was quiet, but Eli could sense Maria's mixture of pride and worry. They had won this round, but Webb's warning echoed in his mind. When they reached the ranch, Sarah and Hope ran out to meet them, faces bright with welcome. That evening, Eli prepared a simple feast to celebrate. The cabin filled with the warm scents of baking cornbread and simmering beans. Hope helped set the table while Sarah proudly carried in the water pitcher. Over supper, Maria's usual reserve softened. "Maybe someday," she said hesitantly, "we could build a real farm there. Plant corn like Mother taught us. Have sheep maybe." "That sounds real fine," Eli smiled, though unease stirred beneath his encouraging words. He had seen too many small farmers pushed out, too many dreams trampled by those with money and influence. The girls helped clean up, then settled by the fire with their mother's shawl wrapped around them. Ailey read from the Bible until their eyes grew heavy. He had just tucked them into bed when he heard hoofbeats approaching. The night was clear, stars sharp as glass above the ranch. Eli stepped onto his porch, rifle ready but not raised. A horse and rider emerged from the darkness, weaving slightly in the saddle. The man's face was half hidden by shadow, but Eli knew him instantly. Had dreaded this moment since finding the girls. Their father swayed as he dismounted, the smell of whiskey carrying on the night air. A revolver hung low on his hip. "Carter," the man slurred, taking an unsteady step forward. "Heard you been keeping what's mine." Eli's hand tightened on his rifle, but he kept his voice calm. "Your girls are sleeping. This isn't the time." "My property," the man insisted, his hand drifting toward his gun. "Won them fair in that game, had a right to leave them where I pleased. Now I hear they're worth something. Got themselves some riverland." He spat into the dirt. "Reckon that changes things." Through the cabin's window, Eli could see Maria's face, pale in the lamplight, watching. He shifted slightly, keeping himself between the drunk man and the door. "You best ride on," Eli said quietly. "Whatever you're thinking, it ends here." The man's fingers brushed his revolver's grip. The night seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which way violence would fall. Hank Dawson's sneer twisted his face in the moonlight. "Stealing another man's children, Carter? That ain't neighborly." "They came here seeking shelter," Eli said evenly, though his heart hammered. "You tied them to my fence posts like cattle." "My property to do with as I please," Dawson spat, swaying. On his feet, his bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Now I hear tell they got themselves some valuable water rights. Mighty interesting timing, you keeping them so close." Behind Eli, the cabin door creaked. Small fingers clutched at his coat, Hope trembling against his legs. Sarah and Maria stood in the doorway, their faces pale circles in the darkness. "Go back inside, girls," Eli said softly, but they stayed rooted in place. Dawson's hand still hovered near his gun. "Come here, girls." Your pa's taking you home. Maria's voice shook but carried clear across the yard. We are home. Ungrateful little. Dawson took a stumbling step forward. Eli's rifle came up slightly, and the drunk man halted. You're leaving now, Eli said. These children aren't going anywhere with you. Dawson spat a brown stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. This ain't over, Carter. I got friends in town. Men who understand a father's rights. He backed toward his horse, nearly missing the stirrup as he mounted. I'll be back with company. You best think hard about crossing me. They watched until his horse disappeared into the darkness. Only then did Eli's shoulders relax slightly. He turned to the girls, gathering them close. Let's get inside. You're safe here. Dawn brought Sheriff Dobbs riding up to the ranch, his expression sour. Eli met him at the gate, already knowing what was coming. Dawson's raising hell in town, Dobbs said without preamble. Says you kidnapped his children. You know that's not true, Eli replied. You saw the condition they were in when I found them. Dobbs shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Don't matter what I saw. Blood's blood, that's the law. If Dawson wants his daughters back, ain't nothing legal stopping him. What about this? Eli pulled out the deed, showing it to the sheriff. Their mother left them land. They have rights. Paper. Don't change parentage. Dobbs handed the deed back with a shrug. My hands are tied, Carter. You best prepare yourself. Dawson won't let this rest. Eli watched the sheriff ride away, frustration burning in his chest. Inside the cabin, the girls waited anxiously around the table. Maria's face fell seeing his expression. The sheriff won't help? She asked quietly. Eli sat heavily in his chair. No, child. Sometimes the law isn't enough. Sometimes we have to stand up for what's right, even when others won't. Like Mama did. Sarah's voice was small. Yes, Eli nodded. Exactly like your mama did, leaving you that deed. She knew you'd need to fight for your place in this world. A shadow crossed the doorway. Jonah Yazzie, his dark eyes taking in the scene. I heard Dawson was back. You heard right, Eli. Confirmed. Sheriff's not interested in helping. Jonah moved to stand beside the table, resting a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder. Then we will help. I knew your mother, child. She was brave and strong. Now we must be brave for you. You'll stay? Hope asked, hope brightening her face. I will stay, Jonah nodded. Some battles should not be fought alone. As night fell, tension crept back into the ranch house. Eli checked his rifle methodically, making sure it was clean and loaded. The girls helped him board up the windows, their small faces serious as they worked. When the tasks were done, they gathered by the hearth. Eli's rough voice softened as he led them in prayer, asking for protection and guidance. Maria added a quiet prayer in Navajo, her sisters echoing the words. Try to sleep, Eli told them afterward, tucking them into bed. I'll keep watch. But rest wouldn't come. Eli sat by the window, rifle across his knees, staring into the darkness. The moon cast long shadows across the yard, every shifting branch making him tense. Jonah kept silent vigil in the corner, his presence reassuring. Eli's thoughts turned to his own quiet life before the girls arrived, the empty rooms, the silence heavy as dust. Now these children had filled his home with life again, with purpose. He would not let them be taken, not back to a father who saw them only as property to be traded or abandoned. Through the night he waited, watching. Somewhere out there, he knew, Hank Dawson was gathering men. But here, in this ranch house turned fortress, Eli Carter made his own gathering, of courage, of determination, of the fierce love that had grown in his heart for 3 girls who needed him to be strong. 3 days crawled by like molasses in winter. The morning chores kept their hands busy, but their minds stayed watchful. Every distant hoofbeat made Sarah drop her feed bucket. Maria's shoulders tensed at each creak of the windmill. Even little Hope startled at the shadow of birds passing. Overhead. Eli tried to keep their routine steady. They fed chickens, mucked stalls, and kneaded bread just as before. But his rifle never left arm's reach, and Jonah's presence became constant as the mountains on the horizon. The Navajo scout took to sleeping in the barn, saying little but watching much. On the second afternoon, Sarah found Eli mending chicken wire near the coop. Her small hands twisted her apron as she approached. "Mr. Carter?" Her voice quivered. Will he take us away?" Eli set down his tools and knelt in the dust before her. The fear in her dark eyes cut him deeper than any knife. He took her small hands in his weathered ones. "Not while I'm breathing, child," he said firmly. "You're safe here. That's a promise." Sarah threw her arms around his neck and he held her close, feeling her racing heart slowly calm. Reverend Amos rode out that same day, his wagon raising dust on the road. He found Eli in the barn, speaking in low tones while the girls were occupied with their chores. "The circuit judge passes through Preston next month," the preacher said, leaning against a post. "We could petition him about the deed, get legal guardianship sorted proper." Eli ran a hand over his face. "A month's a long time, Reverend. Dawson won't wait that long." "No," Amos agreed soberly. "I reckon he won't." The fourth morning dawned clear and cold. Eli worked the north fence line, hammer striking metal as he replaced rusted nails. The rhythm of work almost let him forget his worries, almost. Hooves thundered up the road. Eli's hand dropped to his gun, but it was only Tom Wesley, a neighbor from 3 miles east. His horse was lathered with sweat. "Eli." Tom reined up hard. "Just rode in from town. Dawson's there, buying drinks for every gun hand and drifter who'll listen. Offering good money, too." Ice settled in Eli's stomach. "How many?" "4, maybe 5 that I saw. Mean-looking bunch." Tom shifted in his saddle. "Thought you ought to know." "Much obliged, Tom." Eli was already moving. He whistled sharp, and Jonah appeared from the trees like a shadow taking form. Within minutes, they had the girls bundled into the wagon. Maria clutched Hope close while Sarah gripped the seat with white knuckles. They drove fast to the preacher's homestead, where Mrs. Amos waited with open arms. "Come in, children," she said warmly. "I've got fresh bread cooling." Eli watched them disappear inside, his heart heavy. Around Reverend Amos's sturdy oak table that evening, the men spoke in low voices. Lamplight cast their shadows long on the walls. "If Dawson comes with numbers," Jonah said quietly, "he'll try to overwhelm. Quick, take the girls before help can arrive." Eli nodded grimly. "Then we follow. I won't let him spirit them away." "The pass through Devil's Canyon would be his likely route," Amos added. "It's the fastest way north, where he's known to have friends." They planned until the lamp burned low. Eli would return to the ranch, making it seem the girls were still there. Jonah would watch the road. At the first sign of Dawson's men, they would unite to protect the children. "Remember," Jonah said as they prepared to leave, his hand steady on Eli's shoulder, "your strength will be in protecting, not destroying. The Creator knows your heart." In this, the wisdom in those words steadied Eli's spirit. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about keeping 3 innocent children safe from harm. They rode back to the ranch beneath a gibbous moon. The house stood silent, lamplight glowing soft through the windows. Inside, they found the girls asleep on pallets near the hearth. Hope clutched her rag doll. Sarah had one arm flung protective over her little sister. Maria lay closest to the door, as if standing guard even in sleep. Eli tucked the blanket closer around them, his throat tight. These children had brought life back to his empty home. They trusted him with their safety, their hearts. Whatever came, he would not fail them. Outside, an owl called into the darkness. Somewhere beyond the lamplight, storm clouds were gathering. But for now, in this moment, 3 girls slept peaceful under his roof. Eli settled into his chair by the window, rifle across his knees, and began his vigil. Dawn painted the eastern sky in streaks of pale gold. Frost sparkled on fence posts and wagon wheels, making the world seem hushed and fragile. Inside the barn, Eli and Jonah checked their saddles one final time before the morning patrol. The quiet shattered with the thunder of hooves. 3 riders burst into the yard, kicking up gravel and dust. Hank Dawson led them, his face twisted in a mean smile. His companions were rough men with hard eyes and well-worn gun belts. Before Eli could sprint from the barn, Hank had already dismounted and kicked in the front door. The splintering crack echoed across the yard like a gunshot. Maria's scream pierced the morning air. "Sarah, run!" Eli's heart stopped as Hope's terrified shriek followed. He bolted toward the house, Jonah right behind him. They emerged from the barn, just as Hank dragged Maria and Sarah onto the porch. His meaty hands clamped around their arms. "Papa, please," Sarah sobbed, trying to twist free. "You're hurting us." Maria fought like a wildcat, kicking and scratching. But one of Hank's men grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. The second man kept his pistol trained on the doorway where Mrs. Amos stood clutching a weeping Hope. Ella's vision went red. He charged across the yard, closing the distance in long strides. "Let them go," Hank sneered. "They're mine, Carter." "Always were." Eli launched himself at Hank, tackling him off the porch. They hit the dirt hard, rolling in a tangle of fists and curses. Eli landed 2 solid punches before white light exploded behind his eyes. One of Hank's men had brought his pistol down hard across Eli's skull. The world tilted sideways. Eli struggled to his knees, blood trickling down his temple. Through blurred vision, he watched helplessly as the men dragged Maria and Sarah toward the horses. The girls fought every step, their screams tearing at his heart. "Eli!" Maria reached toward him as they lifted her into the saddle. "Please don't let him take us." Sarah's tear-streaked face turned back to the house. "Hope! Hope!" Their little sister wailed, trying to run to them, but Mrs. Amos held her tight. Hank mounted up, laughing as Eli swayed on his knees. "Thanks for minding them, Carter," he called. "Maybe I'll send you a Christmas card." The riders wheeled their horses around, Maria and Sarah trapped in front of 2 of the men. Hooves thundered across the yard, and then they were gone, leaving only dust and devastation behind. Eli tried to stand, but the world spun. Jonah caught his arm, steadying him. "Easy, brother," the scout said quietly. "You're bleeding." "We have to follow them," Eli ground out through clenched teeth. "Now, yes," Jonah agreed, "but not blindly. Rash pursuit will only endanger the girls more." Hope broke free from Mrs. Amos and ran to Eli, throwing her small arms around his waist. Her whole body shook with sobs. "He took them," she hiccuped. "He took Maria and Sarah away." Eli knelt, ignoring the pounding in his head, and gathered her close. "Listen to me, little one. I'm going to bring them back. I promise you that." Mrs. Amos approached with clean cloths and water. "Let me tend that cut first," she insisted. "You'll do the girls no good if you fall from your saddle." The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. While Mrs. Amos cleaned and bandaged his head, Jonah packed supplies and studied the tracks leading north. Eli checked his rifle and pistol with hands that shook from more than just injury. Hope wouldn't leave his side, clutching his coat as he made ready to mount up. Her small face was pale but determined as she pressed something into his hand, the little rag doll she always slept with. "Give it to Sarah," she whispered, "so she won't be scared." Eli's throat tightened as he tucked the doll carefully into his saddlebag. He lifted Hope up for one last hug, breathing in the clean scent of her hair. "Be brave," he murmured. "We'll bring your sisters home." The sun was sinking toward dusk as they finally rode out, following the clear trail north. Jonah led the way, reading signs in the dust that Eli's eyes would have missed. His head still throbbed, But a deeper ache filled his chest, fear for the girls mixed with unshakable faith that God would guide them true. "They're pushing hard," Jonah observed, studying fresh tracks. "But they'll have to rest the horses." "Soon," Eli nodded grimly, one hand touching the rag doll in his saddlebag. 2 frightened girls were counting on him. Whatever it took, he would not fail them again. The mountain foothills rose before them in waves of pine and stone. Eli's head still throbbed where Hank's man had struck him, but determination drove him forward. Beside him, Jonah studied the ground. With practiced eyes, reading stories in crushed grass and scattered pebbles. "They're staying ahead," Jonah murmured, "but their pace is slowing. The horses will need rest soon." Eli nodded, touching the rag doll in his saddlebag for courage. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the dawn chill. Every minute that passed was another minute the girls endured their father's cruelty. Near midday, Jonah reined his horse to a stop, pointing to a thin wisp of smoke rising above the trees. "There, old line shack. Used by cattlemen during spring drives." They dismounted, leading their horses into a sheltered draw. The animals' hooves were wrapped in cloth to muffle their approach. Eli's joints ached as they crept through the underbrush. But he pushed the pain aside. Through the trees, they could make out a weathered cabin. 3 horses stood tied outside, their sides still dark with sweat. Voices carried through the thin walls, Hank's angry tones rising above the rest. "You ungrateful little," a fist slammed against wood. "After everything I done for you." Maria's voice answered, steady despite her fear. "You left us tied to a fence." Another slam made the cabin's walls shudder. Eli's hands tightened on his rifle until his knuckles went white. Through a gap in the rough boards, he could see Sarah pressed against Maria's side, tears streaming down her face. Jonah's hand settled on his shoulder. "Peace, brother," he whispered. One shot could mean their lives. Eli forced himself to breathe. Slowly, though rage burned in his chest. They watched as the afternoon crawled past. Hank's hired guns grew restless, pacing and smoking. Their eyes kept straying to the darkening sky. "Getting late," one muttered. "Need to move soon." "Shut up," Hank snapped. "We rest the horses proper, or we'll never make the border." As dusk approached, Jonah touched Eli's arm. "I will draw them out. Be ready." The old scout melted into the shadows. Moments later, rocks clattered through the brush on the far side of the clearing. Both hired guns jerked toward the sound. "Check it," Hank ordered. "Probably just deer, but check anyway." The men drew their pistols, moving cautiously into the trees. Eli counted to 10, then slipped toward the cabin's back door. The hinges creaked softly as he eased it open. Maria saw him first. Her eyes went wide, but she pressed her lips together, squeezing Sarah's hand in warning. The younger girl stayed still, though hope flickered across her tear-stained face. "Soon," Eli mouthed silently, edging closer to where they sat bound to. Straight-backed chairs. The ropes looked tight enough to bruise. His fingers had just brushed the first knot when boots scraped on the threshold. "Well, well," Hank's voice dripped with mockery. "Look who came calling." Eli straightened slowly. Hank stood in the doorway, his pistol already drawn. The last rays of sunlight caught the metal barrel, making it gleam dully. "Step away from them," Hank said. Instead, Eli moved to place himself between the gun and the girls. His rifle lay just out of reach, propped against the wall. He could feel Maria and Sarah trembling behind him. "You won't take them again," Eli said quietly. Hank's lip curled. "They're my blood, my property, law's on my side." "They're children," Eli countered, "not property. And I aim to see them safe." "Safe?" Hank barked a laugh. "What do you know about keeping anyone safe? Couldn't even keep your own wife alive." The words struck like physical blows, but Eli held his ground. He could feel Maria pressing against his back, lending him strength. "Last chance, Carter," Hank said. Step aside. No. The word hung in the air between them. Outside, a night bird called. Wind sighed through the pines. And in that moment of tension, Maria's voice rose clear and strong, singing the same Navajo hymn she'd sung in church. Sarah's trembling voice joined her sister's, the melody weaving through the cabin like a prayer. Hank's face did. Shut up. Both of you shut up. But the girls kept singing, their voices growing stronger. Eli stood motionless, his shadow stretching across the floor between his daughters and the man who would harm them. The moment drew taut as a bowstring, waiting for the arrow to fly. The girls' hymn filled the shack, their voices steady and clear in the growing darkness. Hank's face twisted with rage as he jabbed his revolver toward Eli's chest. They're mine. Carter. Hank's words came out in a snarl. My flesh and blood, not yours. Eli stood firm, his shadow stretching protectively across the floor between Hank and the girls. The evening light, filtering through the cabin's cracks, painted stark lines across their faces. A father protects, Eli said evenly, his voice calm. Despite the weapon aimed at him, a father provides. A father does not abandon his children tied to a fence post in the cold. The words landed like stones in still water. Behind Eli, the singing faltered, then stopped. Maria rose from her chair, the ropes falling loose around her wrists. She had been working them free during the standoff. Her small frame trembled, but her chin lifted with quiet dignity. You're not our father anymore, she declared, her voice shaking but clear. A father would not sell us for gambling money. Hank's eyes widened at his daughter's defiance. For a heartbeat, his grip on the revolver loosened, and Eli moved. His hand shot out, knocking the weapon aside. The gun clattered across the wooden floor as both men collided. They crashed into the rough-hewn table, sending it splintering beneath their combined weight. Hank's fist caught Eli's jaw, but Eli drove his shoulder into the gambler's midsection. They rolled across broken boards, each fighting for leverage. The door burst open. One of Hank's hired guns charged in, pistol drawn. But Jonah appeared behind him like a shadow. The old scout's arm locked around the gunman's throat, while his other hand twisted the weapon free. The man struggled briefly before Jonah's precise pressure rendered him unconscious. Hank's fingers scrabbled across the floorboards, reaching for his fallen revolver. Eli kicked it away, then struggled to his feet. In one fluid motion, he snatched up his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. He leveled it at Hank's chest. The cabin fell silent except for harsh breathing. Dust motes danced in the last rays of sunlight streaming through the window. Hank lay sprawled on his back, staring up the rifle's barrel at Eli's face. Eli's finger rested on the trigger. The weight of all Hank's cruelty, the abandonment, the threats, the terror he had brought to these children, pressed down on that single point of contact. One small movement would end it all. Maria and Sarah huddled together, watching. Their faces reflected both fear and hope, not just for their safety, but for Eli's soul. Slowly, deliberately, Eli lowered the rifle. No more blood, he said quietly. Not in front of them. Not ever again. Hank's expression shifted from fear to confusion, unable to comprehend the mercy being shown. He had expected, perhaps even wanted, a violent end to match his violent life. Jonah stepped forward, rope in hand. With swift, practiced movements, he bound Hank's wrists. The gambler offered no resistance. Still staring at Eli as if seeing him for the first time, Maria moved first, breaking away from Sarah to throw her arms around Eli's waist. Sarah followed immediately, pressing her tear-stained face against his side. Eli's free hand came down to rest on Maria's shoulder, his touch gentle despite the tremors of exhaustion running through him. "It's over now," he murmured to them. "You're safe." The words carried the weight of more than just this night's rescue. This was a turning point, the moment when fear gave way to trust, when the bonds of blood were replaced by the stronger ties of love and choice. Eli felt it in the way the girls clung to him, in the profound relief that washed through his own heart. Jonah finished securing Hank, then moved to check on the unconscious hired gun. "The other one ran," he reported, "but he will not return." Eli nodded, still holding the girls close. The battle was won without a shot fired, without adding new violence to the legacy these children would carry. In choosing mercy over vengeance, he had shown them a different path, one of strength tempered by compassion. The last light faded outside as they prepared to leave the cabin. Maria paused in the doorway, looking back at her bound father one final time. There was sadness in her eyes, but no regret. She took Sarah's hand, then reached for Eli's, ready to walk away from the past and toward the future they would build together. Dawn painted the town buildings in pale gold as Eli, Jonah, and Reverend Amos rode in with their captives. Maria and Sarah sat safely behind Eli and Jonah on their horses, while two ranch hands followed with the bound Hank Dawson and his hired gun. The street was quiet except for the hollow sound of hooves on packed earth. A few early risers paused to stare as the group made their way to the sheriff's office. The morning air carried the scent of wood smoke and fresh bread from the baker's shop, a peaceful contrast to the tension evident in every face. Sheriff Dobbs looked up from his desk with obvious irritation as they filed inside. His boots hit the floor with a thud as he straightened, taking in the sight of the bound men. "What's all this then?" he drawled, though his eyes narrowed at the bruises on Hank's face. "Kidnapping," Eli stated firmly. "Assault. Child abandonment." Dobbs scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "We've been through this, Carter. Man's got rights to his own flesh and blood. Not when he ties them to fence posts and leaves them to freeze." Reverend Amos stepped forward, his usually gentle voice hard with conviction. "Not when he trades them like cattle to settle gambling debts." The sheriff's expression remained skeptical, but Jonah moved deliberately to place a leather document folder on his desk. The old scout's movements were careful, measured, commanding. Attention through their very precision. "These children have legal standing," Jonah said quietly. "Their mother, Elena, secured their future before her passing." He opened the folder to reveal the deed, its official seal clearly visible. "This grants them property with water rights on the San Juan. Their father abandoned them to claim it for himself." Dobbs leaned forward despite himself, squinting at the document. His fingers traced the seal, checking for authenticity. "That may be, but I will testify," Reverend Amos interrupted. "I witnessed Elena recording this deed. I found these girls at my mission after Dawson first abandoned them 3 years ago. The law you serve requires you to protect their rights, Sheriff." Maria stepped forward then, her small frame straight as a pine sapling. Her voice trembled but held firm as she spoke. "He left us tied in the cold. He said nobody would want us." Her dark eyes met the sheriff steadily. "He hit Sarah when she cried. He threatened to sell us again if we tried to run." The room fell silent. Even Hank seemed to shrink under the weight of his daughter's words. Dobbs shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unable to dismiss the clear ring of truth in the child's testimony. "Reckon I got no choice but to hold him for the circuit judge," he muttered finally. "Though don't expect much to come of it." The iron cell door clanged shut on Hank Dawson. His hired gun was locked in the adjacent cell, both men to await trial. As they left the sheriff's office, Maria's shoulders sagged with relief. Sarah pressed close to her sister's side, while Eli kept a protective hand on both their shoulders. The ride home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard as they dismounted. Hope burst from the house where she had waited with Reverend Amos's wife, running to embrace her sisters. That evening, the cabin filled with familiar sounds and smells as Eli prepared a simple stew. The girls moved around him with growing ease, Sarah bringing him kindling, Maria setting out tin plates. Hope had claimed her favorite spot on Eli's lap as he stirred the pot. her small form fitting perfectly in the circle of his arms. "We're really safe now, aren't we?" she whispered, her face turned up to his. Eli nodded, though he knew the legal battles over their land and custody still loomed ahead. "Yes, little one, you're safe here." The stew was served as Sarah's soft humming filled the cabin. The tune was one of her mother's hymns, and Maria soon joined in, their voices twining together like mountain streams meeting in the valley. After the dishes were cleared, Maria lingered by Eli's chair. Her fingers worried the edge of her shawl, but her voice was steady. Will you stay our guardian, even after everything's settled?" Eli's heart swelled with tender fierceness. "If you'll have me," he answered simply. Tears brightened Maria's eyes as she nodded. Hope slipped her small hand into Eli's while Sarah pressed against his side. They gathered together, heads bowed in prayer, their voices joining as one in gratitude. The cabin glowed with warmth from the hearth and from something deeper, the light of renewed hope, of family forged in trial and sealed with love. The autumn week stretched long as the county court deliberated. Each morning brought fresh frost to the window panes and new worries to the ranch. Ranchers from miles around filed protests against the deed, fearing the loss of precious water access along the San Juan River. Their anger simmered just beneath the surface of polite greetings in town. Eli and Reverend Amos rode frequently to the courthouse, sometimes staying away for days to present their testimony. During these absences, Jonah proved invaluable, helping the girls maintain their daily routines. His quiet presence brought comfort and stability, teaching them old Navajo words as they worked. Despite the uncertainty hanging over them, life at the ranch bloomed with small joys. Sarah mastered the art of riding, her confidence growing with each successful mount. Soon she was helping Jonah round up strays, her laughter carrying across the pasture. Hope transformed the bare earth near the cabin into a garden, carefully tending the hardy flowers she'd planted. Maria's nimble fingers created cheerful curtains for the windows, the fabric bringing warmth to their home. One crisp afternoon, as Eli returned from checking fence lines, he found an official envelope waiting. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal from the land office. The girls gathered close, watching his face as he read. "The deed is upheld," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "The land is yours, with water rights intact. And he paused, steadying himself. "I am named your legal guardian." Maria grabbed his arm. "Read it again," she whispered. "Please." Eli waited until supper, when they all sat around the table. By lamplight, he read every word of the ruling aloud. The legal language was dry, but its meaning rang clear as a bell. Their claim was rightful, their future secure. Hope squealed with delight, while Sarah clapped her hands. Maria sat very still, tears sliding down her cheeks. Then all three girls were hugging Eli at once, nearly knocking him from his chair. The news spread quickly through the territory. Some ranchers remained bitter, turning away when Eli passed. But others began to soften, won over by the quiet dignity with which the family had weathered the storm. They saw not a threat to their water rights, but a man and 3 children who had earned their place through perseverance and grace. That evening, the cabin glowed with more than firelight. It shone with the warmth of victory honestly won, of belonging fully claimed, of a family finally whole. The evening sky turned deep purple beyond the cabin windows as Eli stoked the hearth fire. Supper dishes had been cleared away, leaving only the comfortable quiet of a family at rest. The flames cast dancing shadows on the log walls, warming the room against the autumn chill. Maria sat at the rough-hewn table, patient as she guided. Sarah's hand across lined paper. "That's right," she murmured, "just like that." Sarah's tongue poked out in concentration as she formed each letter carefully. The scratch of pencil on paper mingled with the crackling fire Hope nestled against. Eli sighed in his old leather chair, her small frame fitting perfectly in the space between his arm and chest. Her eyes were heavy with contentment as she hummed softly, the same hymn her mother Elena had once sung, its melody carrying memories of love that transcended loss. Outside, coyotes called to one another across the darkening range. They're wild. Voices echoed off distant cliffs, but inside the cabin, all was peace. The windows gleamed with lamplight, and the curtains Maria had sewn stirred gently in the evening breeze. Eli looked upon his daughters, for that was truly what they were now, by choice and grace and law. His throat tightened as he remembered that cold dawn when he'd found them tied to his fence posts, abandoned and afraid. Now Sarah's laughter came quick and bright. Hope's nightmares had faded, and Maria's shoulders had lost their defensive hunch. Overcome with gratitude, Eli bowed his head. "Lord," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "we thank you for second chances, for showing us that mercy beats vengeance, and that love can grow even in the hardest soil." He paused, gathering himself. "Thank you for filling this empty house with new life." The girls lifted their faces, joining their voices with his. Hope's small hand slipped into his larger one as they prayed. Maria's clear voice carried strong and sure, while Sarah whispered earnestly along. The lamp flickered, casting warm light on their bowed heads. Where silence had once pressed heavy in the cabin, now peace dwelled. Where loneliness had echoed, now laughter rang. Where doubt had haunted, now faith bloomed. Eli opened his eyes to find his home transformed, not by grand changes, but by the quiet miracle of family found and cherished. The long battle for custody and land rights had strengthened rather than broken them. Now they could face tomorrow together, their bonds forged in trial and sealed with love. As the fire settled to glowing coals, the cabin held them close in its warmth, a sanctuary of hope against the gathering night. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.